Okay, good morning, friends. Saline Mayor Brian Marl joining you here on Friday a little bit after 8 o'clock. I apologize for the late start. For those of you who are joining us via Zoom or Facebook Live, welcome. There are a few folks in the audience or in council chambers this morning, including three of my colleagues, Mayor Pro Tem Dean Gearbaugh and council members Janet Dillon and Jack Seo. Also with us is Interim City Manager Mike Green, Wastewater Treatment Superintendent Wygowski, and in just a moment I'm going to yield the floor to Brian Rubel, who's one of our consultants from Tetra Tech. So as you are likely aware, the main topic of conversation this morning is the wastewater treatment plant, more specifically the future of wastewater services in the city of Saline. So the format for this morning's coffee hour is at the conclusion of my opening obligatory remarks, I'm going to yield the floor to Brian Rubel, who's going to provide a 5 to 10 minute overview of the wastewater treatment siting study that was approved by council in late 2019 and completed in January of 2020. He will have a PowerPoint which will also appear on your screen. At the conclusion of his remarks, we'll turn it over to Superintendent Wygowski. At the conclusion of Mr. Wygowski's remarks, if Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh or Councilwoman Dillon would like to share some thoughts, I would welcome that because they've been working with staff and legal counsel on an administrative consent order with Eagle reference our wastewater treatment plant. At the end of all that, I'm going to touch on a few other things, including my July 6th State of the City address, and then we would welcome your questions, comments. I did receive a few in advance of today's coffee hour via email. If you do have questions or comments, please type them in on Facebook or Zoom, and our IT director, Chris Schonk, who's running the meeting today, will relay those to me, and we will do our very best to address them. So with that, I am going to yield the floor to Brian Rubel. Brian, thank you for being here this morning.
You're welcome. Well, good morning. I will do my best to summarize a series of meetings and a report in a very short period of time. So I have a larger presentation, but I'm going to skip across several slides. But just as a precursor to a major capital project, they are done in phases. You do not just jump right to a major design project. You generally look at things at a high level and a small amount of money, and then as you focus and fine-tune your thoughts, you invest more and more at each stage, just to wisely use money. So the the siting study could be considered more of a very conceptual evaluation of alternatives, was not anywhere close to actually starting a detailed design process. So things are looked at a very high level, and was enough, I believe, to adequately screen options for the city to then invest further amounts of money down the road and do that in a very smart manner. Just by way of a very brief summary of the plant originally was constructed in the 1950s, and then as the city grew, major expansions and capital projects were conducted in 1986, early part of this century, and some fairly good projects even in the last few years. The plant is permitted to treat 1.81 MGD, and during average day conditions it is still below that, but creeping up towards that. The plant could be depicted here with this diagram, this photograph with annotations of major processes. The plant right now, looking at the upper end over here, these are called rotating biological contactors. They're the real workhorse there for the biologic process to consume organic material in the wastewater and hence more easily remove it in downstream processes. Other parts of the plant are very conventional, clarifiers to settle out processes both before the RBCs and after the RBCs. Third process to filter the water, disinfect the water before it goes to the river, and then, of course, the plant involves removing waste from the flow stream, so there are a series of processes designed to capture that waste and process it for disposal. The alternatives that were looked at broadly, and there are sub-alternatives within this. First alternative was to look at expanding the plant at its current location. We call that number one. Looking Number 2 was looking for a new site. We looked at 3 sites around the city, 3 sites that we thought were feasible. There's probably more under consideration or could be considered. We looked at number 3, pumping wastewater to the Ypsilanti Community Utilities Authority. About 9 miles away, we'd have to pump it to get to a sewer that would take it to the plant. And the 4th option we looked at was combining both the YCUA option and continuing to treat within the city of Saline. Again, the 1A, treating at the existing site. The darker lines just represent processes that we had conceptually located within the current footprint. So it'd be a more dense type of a treatment system if we stayed at the current site. We also looked briefly at acquiring other parcels near the plant site just to give us a little bit more space to do that. That is very similar to, we called it 1A and 1B. Stay exactly where you are, and 1B kind of look surrounding the plant. 2, a new site. We looked at 3 sites, one west of the city, one south of the city, and one I will call southeast of the city. Pros and cons to each of those, pros and cons to doing that as well. I will not go into any detail on those sites until maybe there are some questions. Spent quite a bit of time looking at treatment at YCUA, and that would then, the city would then get out of the actual treatment process operating business and contract with the Ypsilanti Community Utilities Authority for that. Again, there are always pros and cons with every alternative, as there was with that one. And various locations we could take it. Some included cooperating with Pittsfield and using portions of their sewer system as well. Item 4 was, again, we would continue to treat at the current plant, maximize the current processes we had, and then any difference we would send to YCUA. And that actually, as we'll see in the cost a little bit later, turned out to be a fairly costly item, primarily because a lot of the growth that may occur in the city is on the west side. So we had to convey it a great distance to make that work out. So a brief cost summary. We compile costs for each of these alternatives. Again, you'll see in 2 there are A, B, and C, just corresponding to different locations that we assumed for treatment. But the costs range from, on the low end, staying at the current site, of about $76 million of capital cost, to the combined approach of using both the current plant and YCUA was about 2.5 times that at $176 million. One real significant advantage of staying at the current location, you have all the sewers already bringing the water to the treatment plant, but the primary reason that turns out to be very advantageous is you do not have to invest that entire $76 million immediately. You can stage it and phase it, and as Saline continues to grow, you can take off a portion of that $76 million in phases. So it would be very expensive to do any one of these in a single project, so biting it into pieces really makes quite a bit of economic sense for the sewer users. And to that end, due to the advantageous nature of that, the City Council has elected to begin looking at parcels in and around the current plant and their environmental history, just to better understand the risk that may be associated with using that real estate. So that has started in the last couple of weeks and will continue into September. So with that, I think that's a fairly broad overview of the alternatives, and I will be available for questions as our time goes this morning.
Thank you, Brian. And for folks who are viewing this at home, if you'd like to see the wastewater treatment siting study in its totality, this is the binder, they are available. We can provide a hard copy, or an electronic copy. And if you're interested in reviewing this data and the analysis, please email my office directly at Brian D. Marl, B-R-I-A-N, the letter D, as in my middle initial, Douglas, Marl, M-A-R-L, @gmail.com, all one word, all lowercase, and I would be happy to provide that. At this time, I'm going to bring our wastewater treatment superintendent, Steve Wygowski, forward to share some additional remarks. Please.
Good morning. As Mr. Rubel stated, the current plant is old, and we're struggling to keep it operating properly. So staff is eagerly awaiting the decision and the implementation of the new improvements to the plant. Our mission in the meantime is to keep the plant operating properly and get all processes up and functioning properly. The two major problems have been the RBCs, which Brian mentioned, which are called rotating biological contactors, and also the NOVA filters that have been problematic since their implementation back in 2016. The NOVA filters have been refurbished, and since they've been installed, they've been running properly. They've been beefed up considerably, and they seem like after 6 months or so that the solution is working. The RBCs, we currently have 18 RBCs, 17 are currently functioning. We're awaiting the last electrical control box for the 18th, and that should be done hopefully next week or the week after, and we'll have all 18 functioning. And that makes me lead into the odor control project also. We believe that when all the processes are functioning properly, that the odor control equipment as installed should work as expected. The odor control equipment is functioning properly, but with the RBCs not working properly, we believe there's excess odors coming from those. So once we get the RBCs up and running, we'll have a better feel for how that equipment works together. And as the new plant comes online, hopefully we'll work with Tetra Tech on integrating the investment in the odor control equipment into the new equipment that we have, so it's not something that's a dinosaur and that can't be used in the future. A couple of other items that we've ran into lately. We had a clarifier that was down due to a plugged sludge line. Those sludge lines have been problematic. We had a hard time draining the tank due to the pump that we currently had would not have enough lift to empty the tank. So in our budget, in our capital improvement plan, we had $60,000 in this year's budget to buy a new pump, and we're currently getting specifications ready, and we'll put that out to bid shortly. And what that pump will do will help us drain the tanks so we can inspect them on a more frequent basis, clean them out, see if there's any problems. And that'll also be available to be used if we have a problem at any of our pump or lift stations, to put that in and bypass the station during an outage or a problem. So what that does is, of course, prohibit the opportunity for a sewage backup from that lift station not working, and then we won't have to rent an emergency pump, which is very expensive. So I think it'll be very cost-effective, and that pump should be in service for a good 20 to 30 years. So that'll be a good thing that both our plant and the DPW can use as well. I guess the final item, we've had some problems over the last year with excessive flows, and it's been somewhat hard to determine whether it's been very rainy the last 2 springs. It's hard to determine whether this is kind of an unusual event or if it's a climate change induced type event. But what we did find, our DPW did locate 3 manholes on what is called our central belt, which is near North Ann Arbor Street and Waterworks Road. The 3 manholes had cracked rings around the surface, and they're very low in elevation. So during the rain events, the water would pool up and would just pour into these manholes. So for example, our design flow, as Brian mentioned, is 1.81 MGD. We were getting 5.5 to 6 MGD, million gallons per day, on those events, which is not acceptable. And even having 1 manhole that's the structure is not solvent can cause quite a bit of flow. So they fixed those, and we'll monitor that over the next several storm events to see if that has taken care of that problem. The pump that I talked about also can be used when we do have those storm events. The river gets high and we're not able to pump out of our plant. It backs up into our plant. So this new pump that we're going to buy, we can use that to pump from our effluent, the treated water, out to the river so we don't back up into the plant. So that's another use of that pump. So our goal with my staff is to assess the existing conditions and try to maintain the equipment as best we can and have everything fully operational over the next few years, because it is going to take several years, even with us moving as quickly as possible to get everything up and running. But I think that's a brief synopsis of where we are, and I'll answer questions after if there are any.
Thank you, Steve. Before we open it up for questions, I want to touch briefly on the odor abatement initiative. And Mr. Rubel, since you were involved in that, perhaps you can comment as well. But just a little bit of background for those who are participating remotely. I believe it was 3-4 years ago now that City Council engaged Webster Environmental, who I believe is out of Kentucky, to do an analysis of our wastewater treatment plant, specifically as it relates to noxious odors. And I should note for the record that Webster Environmental has a national reputation. They've done odor abatement projects and analyses, I believe, in all 50 states, including some of the U.S. territories. So they came in and made a series of recommendations, working with Tetra Tech and a variety of contractors. We implemented those recommendations. That project was completed in the late summer of 2019, if I believe. And as Superintendent Wygowski indicated, it is my belief, through my own anecdotal observations and the research I've been able to review, that when all of the equipment is working properly, that our odor abatement project was and is successful. However, I'll note for the record that we still receive odor complaints from time to time, and as such, I believe it was Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh who made a recommendation 2 City Council meetings ago that we bring back Webster Environmental to do another walkthrough and analysis of our plant to see if additional upgrades or fine-tuning is necessary. So that will be done in the imminent future. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Rubel. And Brian, if you might, provide maybe a 2 to 5 minute overview of the specifics of the Webster Environmental analysis and what new equipment was brought online subsequent to City Council adopting their recommendations.
Can you, on that laptop, can you let people in the waiting room in? We have people waiting.
Right here?
Yep.
Admit all?
Yep.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's the only laptop that'll let them in.
Very good. Sorry about that. If there were folks waiting in the waiting room on Zoom, I apologize, but I would note again, you can view us via live stream on Facebook by going to the City of Saline's government page, and you can also type in questions and comments there. Mr. Rubel.
So regarding the odor control project, I don't have any visual aids to show today, but again, the project started late 2017 with the design phase, and the construction then started in early 2018, finished in 2019. It followed Webster's study pretty much to the letter. I believe certainly 99% of the odor-causing processes at the wastewater plant were controlled with the project. Basically, the workhorse of the project consisted of collecting foul air from processes throughout the plant and funneling it to essentially 2 different treatment units, one of which used activated carbon, which is kind of a charcoal type process. That technology is used in many different processes to filter air and water, similar to the filters you have in your refrigerator that would filter the water before it came out the drinking water spout. That has about a 5-year life with that activated carbon, plus or minus a little bit. Very reliable technology, and we believe all the measurements have shown that it exceeds the specifications. The second technology that's used at the Saline plant is a bioscrubber, a very tall tower that has a sponge-like media within it that fosters bacteria to grow on the media. And this bacteria that grows uses foul air as a food source. It sustains this bacteria. And the bacteria then is removed periodically with irrigation water and so forth. But Very reliable technology used throughout the country. Very pleased with the measurements that we have seen from it, also exceeding the specifications. The odor control also has various smaller carbon canisters throughout the plant and the south side pump station as well to treat odors that would escape at those points, as well as a smaller process around the digester to kind of mask a little bit of foul odor. Very small percentage of the total at the wastewater plant. Again, we have conducted numerous measurements. The contract required measurements from an outside party, and all of those measurements exceeded the industry standard for odor control. And in fact, the Michigan Eagle visited the site last fall at the request of a property owner and really gave the city compliments for the performance of the odor control system. Their measurements essentially showed zero odor compounds escaping the plant site as well. So very pleased with the performance of the odor control system, and again, I would be available for questions regarding that.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that synopsis. And the Webster Environmental Odor Analysis is also a document that's available for public distribution. If that's something that you'd like to see, feel free to contact my office and we can get you a hard copy or an electronic copy. Trying to wrap up the discussion on wastewater services and the future of wastewater services in the city of Saline. As I mentioned at the start of this morning's coffee hour, I am going to yield the floor in just a moment to Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh, and then if Councilwoman Dillon would like to add some remarks, I would welcome that. Both of them have been working on an administrative consent order with the state of Michigan, reference our wastewater treatment plant. This has been an issue that has been discussed at regular city council meetings and at a special city council meeting. Negotiations are ongoing, so we will be somewhat limited on what we can share publicly today, but I did want to provide Mr. Gearbaugh an opportunity to share some remarks if he deemed appropriate. So be sure to speak into that microphone there. Yeah, the one on the left.
As you know, the city received an administrative order from the state of Michigan regarding our waste treatment plant, and we've been negotiating with them for approximately the last 6 months in terms of the concerns and issues. And at this point, we basically have settled upon all the issues. Now it's just kind of wrapping up the last few items, and we intend to have probably another meeting with our council and hopefully wrap this completely up within the next month or so that we can at least prevent any further delays in addressing it. Some of the issues and concerns are being dealt with already. We already know that our NOVA filters were part of the concern, and those, as we know, are now up and running and have been repaired, so hopefully that'll proceed and continue to go that route. As for the other aspects of it, I do want to let you know that part of the reason for this AOC was due to Adelina Farms and our proactive approach to the state. So at this point, some of that was on our part and notifying the state and trying to bring this into, I think, compliance ourselves. And now the state decided that they're going to look at us from a perspective of their own enforcement. And this information probably has been available for them for many years. And since 2019, they've decided to come forward and start looking at all areas that are addressing this kind of thing. I think probably as a result of what happened up at Flint. So at this point right now, there's no real further information except that we're looking forward to a very successful settlement, and how we will resolve our own concerns and moving forward should be fairly soon. Thank you. Janet, if you have any questions?
No, as we're limited in what we can say, I think you did a great job.
Okay. And Ms. Dillon concurs with us. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gearbaugh. Before we open up for questions, one last thing. I have spoken to my council colleagues and staff, specifically the interim city manager and our wastewater treatment superintendent about this, but as soon as we are safely able to do so, we hope to have on-site tours, specifically an on-site open house at our wastewater treatment plant, so that our citizens and utility users can become familiar and knowledgeable about the processes on site, and also can ask questions regarding odor abatement and our plans to to expand and grow in place. I do want to message on that very briefly. As Mr. Rubel indicated, that appears to be the consensus of council to date, growing in place, and that's why at our last two meetings, or two of our last meetings, excuse me, City Council did approve Phase 1 environmental analyses for our existing site, as well as two adjacent properties on the east and west side of Monroe Street, formerly owned and operated by Universal Die-Cast Hoover Ball Bearing. So from a phased perspective and more importantly from a cost perspective, it seems most appropriate to grow in place and expand services and capacity in the ensuing decades. So with that, we will open it up for questions regarding odor abatement, wastewater treatment plant, future of wastewater services. I'll call upon our IT director, Mr. Schonk. Have we received any questions or comments via Facebook or Zoom? Not at this time. Okay. Well, if you do have questions or comments, feel free to type them in the comment section on Facebook. Our IT director can correct me if I'm wrong, but if you'd like to submit a comment or question via Zoom, you're going to go to the chat icon at the bottom of your screen and type in your question. Is that correct, Chris? Very good. I did receive one question in advance of today's meeting, indirectly related to wastewater services. This came from a resident on the west side of our community, and it's referenced Andalina Farms. I'm not going to read the message in its entirety. I was given permission to paraphrase. I will read, I think, the first paragraph. And I quote, since the developer of Andalina Farms is very busy leveling ground and is already working on the construction site, is there any possibility of going back to an initial plan before COVID between the City of Saline, the township, and the developer to annex the sub into the city to provide for their needs? Many of us feel that between the city and township and developer, it made sense for them to commit millions of dollars to connect to city and water sewer services. It seems that this is the best possible solution for all parties. And then there's some additional concerns about having a private package plant adjacent to the city of Saline on our western gateway right along US 12. I think I can provide a very clear and succinct and unambiguous answer to this question. I believe that my sentiments reflect the majority of City Council, but it's certainly not unanimous. I think my position has been clear over the past year and a half. I think it would be best for Andalina Farms to be brought into the city to see water and sewer services connected to that site and to have that parcel be annexed into the corporate limits of Saline. Unfortunately, well, let me take a step back. We engaged in a good faith effort with the developer, with their legal team, and with our legal counsel to draft a development agreement whereby they would, the developer, MI Homes, would provide the city upwards of $5 million to connect to city water and sewer utilities. And that is far in excess of what they would pay in normal water and sewer connection fees. That would have brought them into the city and would have negated the need for a private package plant. From a growth, land management, and environmental perspective, I still believe that that is what is best for this community. Unfortunately, in light of COVID and the subsequent shutdown of the economy, we were not able to execute or approve that development agreement. But my office stands ready and is welcome to entertain questions and concerns or discussions with the developer or his associates, because I would very much like to see if there's a way to bring this property into the city of Saline. But at this point, that's the developer's choice. They have received all the necessary permits from the state and Saline Township to proceed with a private development. But again, if they're interested in having discussions with the city of Saline, my door is always open, and I would welcome and support that. So, Chris, I'll ask again, any additional questions that have been submitted via Zoom or Facebook? No, not at this time. Okay. Well, before we transition to some other issues, I would call upon, let me first call upon staff. Mr. Wygowski, Mr. Green, our consultant, Mr. Rubel, anything that you would like to add at this time? No? And what about for my council colleagues, Mr. Seo, Mr. Gearbaugh, or Ms. Dillon? Yeah, please, if you'd like to come forward. Absolutely.
So one of the things I wanted to make mention of, and I don't think it's on your screen right now, but there was a slide that was brought up, and it's actually still on the screen here at City Hall, which is the cost summary. If you look at the numbers, it's very alarming. And when council has been evaluating this process, one of the tipping points for us in looking at our existing site is what Mr. Rubel discussed, which is that the project could be phased, which would not mean such a large increase in fees for users. So I think that's really important, because when you do look at these numbers, they're really big. And it's going to be really important to keep that in mind and make it manageable. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything you want to add on that one? Jack, Dean, you were good? Okay. Chris, I guess I'll ask one more time. Any questions, comments submitted via Zoom or Facebook? No? Easy enough. Perhaps we'll be able to wrap this up rather early. I do want to touch on a few things apart from wastewater services. As many of our residents know, it is a charter requirement that the mayor of Saline provide a written and verbal address to city council and the community twice a year. It's referred to as a state of the city address. It's a common practice in many municipalities across our region and state. I provide an address at our first meeting in January and then our first meeting in July. And when I first assumed the office, I thought the requirement was rather onerous, but upon proper reflection, it has been a great privilege and an honor to provide an update and provide a synopsis of what we've accomplished, but more importantly, where we are headed as a community and what I hope we can accomplish in the ensuing months and years. So on July the 6th, which was the first meeting in July, which also happened to be my birthday, I delivered a verbal address to City Council, and then subsequent to that, later in the week, I believe Wednesday of that same week, I did a live stream interview with Tran Longmore from the Saline Post, discussing the specifics of my speech and a variety of other issues. I believe we talked for the better part of an hour, hour and a half. That live streamed interview is still available on the web, specifically on the Saline Post Facebook page. And I also entertained a number of questions that afternoon when I went over my address. My address, each one of my addresses is divided into 5 sections. And interestingly enough, those 5 sections directly correlate with the 5 issues that I ran on when I first announced my candidacy for mayor in the spring of 2012. And that is support for public safety, critical investments in our infrastructure, sound financial management, openness and transparency in city government, and economic development. So my speech is available online. I'm also happy to provide copies to anyone who would like to review one, or who would like to review it, rather. Excuse me. I did spend a great deal of time in this address touching on issues involving diversity and inclusion in light of events that have happened in Saline and elsewhere. And I'm proud that at one of our recent meetings, City Council unanimously adopted a resolution declaring racism as a public health crisis. And I'm also pleased that likely on our September 14th council agenda, I'll be asking City Council to authorize the creation of a diversity task force that has been spearheaded by a number of local individuals, including our council colleague, Kevin Kamara-Sulak, and city resident Kirsten Woodside. I've also organized with the MSU Extension, specifically with a Mr. Leonardo Pianza, who is a diversity, equity, and inclusion instructor, to do mandatory staff trainings here at City Hall, not only for staff, but also for other key community stakeholders. And as soon as we're safely able to conduct those trainings, we will do so. We are tentatively planning early September. Transitioning away from diversity and inclusion, I talk a lot about our budget and municipal finances, and of course I'm proud of our fund balance policy, our improved bond rating, our sizable fund balance, and the key investments we make into areas that have a direct impact on our citizens' quality of life. On the economic development front, the COVID global health pandemic and the subsequent shutdown in the economy have had devastating effects on our local businesses. That's why it's so important now more than ever that each one of us support our local enterprises and patronize them as much as we are able to do so. I'll also note as soon as we can safely conduct our normal economic development, business attraction, and retention meetings, we will do so. We generally have a small business luncheon, a large business luncheon, and then beginning in 2018, we began hosting a job fair event to support our businesses in their ongoing efforts to attract and retain talent. And we hope to do so, if not in late 2020, then in early 2021 as well. What else do I want to touch on this morning? And I'll actually yield the floor to Mr. Gearby if he's so inclined. I'll preface by saying, this is not glamorous or sexy, but it is very important and critical. At one of our July meetings, City Council authorized the creation of a risk mitigation working committee to evaluate risk and reduce liability within city government. And that group is charged with looking at every division and department of city government. And they've had 3 meetings thus far. In fact, our 3rd meeting was just yesterday evening. They're off to a excellent start under the leadership of Mayor Pro Tem Dean Gearbaugh and our facilitator, who happens to be a city resident with more than 2 decades of high-level risk mitigation experience. Her name is Lori Champion. I couldn't be more pleased with how things are progressing. And Mr. Gearbaugh, I don't know if you wanted to provide an update, but I'd be happy to yield the floor if you'd like to provide the community maybe a brief synopsis of how things are progressing.
As we know, most organizations face a period of time when they're believing that, we need to assess things and look at things. And our risk management team, which has been brought together, I believe is going to be on the track to help us address many of the concerns that come up that we as council members and even as leadership may not see it or understand what's going on. And so as part of our group, Ms. Champion is leading us in terms of how we will assess and look at all the activities from accounting, from finance, HR, our wastewater treatment plant, water production, police, and all that. So at this point now, we've basically moved forward to developing what individuals we intend to interview, how and what functions that we're going to look at, and then proceed with that. The goal is for us over the next 6 months, and hopefully by next Q1 or Q2, to have a report that will come back and explain where we believe there are some concerns and issues. At this point right now, the group is made up of Mitch Road, Rebecca Schneider, Jim Delorco, who is also a council member, John Ambrose, a city resident, myself, and the mayor. And all of our backgrounds cover a wide field of administration and accounting. We're covering city development and those activities, engineering. Mr. Ambrose has a background in water treatment and those type of services. Mitch Road in entrepreneurial and technology. So from our background, we believe that this group is going to be a very good approach to look at how everything is functioning and how we look at this. We believe there is a lot of work ahead of us. We have to look at documentation. We have to look at how we discuss our interviews, our questions, allowing what needs to be done after we may do one interview. We may need to bring in additional individuals. We're going to be looking at the city. We're going to look at talking with external parties and so forth, so we understand everything and have a perspective that we believe can bring back to the council an encompassed report and hopefully be able to provide some more security and for our strategic plan goals for which we will move forward in the next 3 to 5 to 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gearbaugh. Let me wrap this up by touching on a few other critical areas that were addressed in my State of the City address. On the infrastructure front, specifically road maintenance, we have some forthcoming resurfacing projects, and if the interim city manager will confirm, weather permitting, several of them will begin this Monday. Those will be resurfacing projects on Watson, Whittier, and Nichols, as well as Mills Road on the west side of town. And then later this construction season, likely in early September, there will also be additional work done on Maple, significant patching between Clark and Maple and the library, and then a more traditional resurfacing on North Maple, adjacent to where the future Layer Farm subdivision will be. I want to touch for just a moment on Parks and Recreation. As I mentioned in one of my weekly PSAs, I believe 2 weeks back, we are very eager and excited to reopen the rec center when we are given permission to do so. They have done painting, floor restoration, rearranged equipment, and have conducted a deep cleaning of our recreation complex during its closure. And again, as soon as we are safely able to reopen, we will do so with social distancing and public health in mind. Also on the September 14th council agenda, which is our next meeting, there will likely be an action item regarding a river walk. I initiated conversation on this topic back in 2019. I believe that Mill Pond Park, which is arguably one of the county's nicest parks, is not fully utilized, and that there should be a non-motorized pathway connecting the parking lot at Bennett to where the park ends, adjacent to the dam at US 12 and Mills. We did a feasibility study last year, and now we're going to transition to design and construction, and I'm very excited that we're moving forward with this. One final comment relating to public safety. As most of our citizens are aware, our police department and fire department are well led and managed under the leadership of Chief Hart and Chief Heft. We have a new deputy chief, Marlene Radzik, who joined us in early July, who came to the city of Saline after a 20-plus year career at the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Department, where she rose to the rank of police commander, and she's doing a phenomenal job. So if you see her out and about, please welcome her. I'm also excited that City Council, under the leadership of Chief Hart, has approved a scholarship sponsorship program for young people to go through the police academy. This allows people who might not have the economic means to pay for the police academy. It provides them the ability and the opportunity to go through the academy, and then we will bring them on as officers, and they'll likely sign a contract assuring that they'll give at least 2 years of service to the city of Saline. So very exciting. We have sponsored a young man who's in the academy now. My understanding is he's doing an outstanding job and will likely join our force in the fall of this year. And speaking of Chief Hart and Deputy Chief Radzik, the two of them and I are hosting a back-to-school event next Thursday at Mickey's Dairy Twist. We want to celebrate our students and compliment them on their academic achievements. We'll be slinging ice cream, and the first 2 scoops are on the Chief and I. And that event will run next Thursday from 2 to 4 at Mickey's Dairy Twist, and it is open to any and all students within the Saline Area School District. As folks know, openness and transparency and robust communication is a key priority for the City of Saline and my office specifically. I hope you'll connect with me on Facebook, on Instagram, or never hesitate to call, email, or text if you have a question or concern. And please be looking for my weekly PSAs, which I produce every week, and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. And if there are issues you would like me to address in my weekly PSA, please contact my office, and I would be happy to comment on those issues in one of my forthcoming PSAs. Before we wrap this up, I'll ask our RT director one more time, did we receive any comments or questions via Zoom or Facebook? We did not? Okay. Well, it's my understanding that many people will be watching this coffee hour remotely at their convenience. And so if you do have any questions after you review the video recording, feel free to reach out. Again, you can connect with me via phone or text. And if you'd like a copy of the Webster Environmental Report or the siting study, feel free to connect with us. We'd be happy to provide you a hard copy or an electronic copy, whichever you prefer. Thank you so much, and be well and stay healthy, my friends. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.